first wine we have in our tasting is the 2005 Reserve Shiraz. It was actually the first one I was involved with, and I don't know if there's any sentimentality involved, but it is still my favourite of all of this bracket that we're about to look at. The 2005 growing season started early and was quite mild, and there was relatively good amounts of rain through there, so the vines grew a very good canopy, and that allowed the ripening to proceed at a fairly good rate. The warm weather in February accelerated the ripening and brought on the flavour development. Ripening was probably a couple of weeks ahead of what we were anticipating, and the ripening of the components that went into this wine first picked on the 17th of February in 2005. At the end of February we had a very warm weekend, and this sent the remaining fruit that was still on the vine into a tailspin as such, and the ripening accelerated at a huge rate, which meant that there was a very fast influx of harvesting done and the fruit that came into the winery, and that really gave us a lot of dark and quite ripe fruit flavours for the components that were harvested later on in the season. By mid-March, most of our Shiraz was off the vine, and the concentration of flavour was a characteristic of the vintage that really has an impact at the time and is still carried through into the concentration that you see in the bottle today. So it's interesting that this wine still has a huge intensity of colour at, what are we now, 13 years old. The colour has developed into a brick red, but there's still a lot of depth in the glass. Still a lot of savoury notes coming through. There's some examples of bottle development coming on in there, but there's still some remnants of the dark spice and the dark fruit that we saw at the time all the way back when we were blending this wine in early 2000 or late 2006. On the palate, there's some lovely rich tannin, but still some firmness and still a lot of structure sitting there, so this wine still has some time left in it. Some lovely cherry and plum mulberry characters still sitting there on the mid palate. Its acidity is still sitting in the background behind the tannin, again helping to hold the structure of the wine together. It's a beautifully interesting and complex wine, and the more time that you leave it sit in the glass, the more it opens up and the more it tends to give you, and that's what I love about this wine in general, and that's why it's one of my favourites. It's an interesting, quirky, developing and overall very enjoyable wine.